Welcome to the Afghanistan Project podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and I'm happy to reintroduce today's guest, Chris Robinson. Chris was on a while before talking about the last deployment project, and we're back today for what probably is going to be the first HKIA anniversary episode. Let me give you guys a bit about Chris in case you missed the previous episode. Chris is a Marine infantry veteran and oral historian. He served from 2016 to 2020 with the 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, 2nd Marine Division out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Originally from Southeast Louisiana, he's a two-time graduate from Southeastern Louisiana University, getting a BA in English with a concentration in creative writing in 2016 and an MA in history in 2023. He started the last deployment project while he was at university and conducted his first interview in October 2022. In April 2023, he published his 176-page thesis, The Last Deployment Project, Voices from HKIA. And as of now, he's conducted more than 60 interviews, totaling more than 250 hours of recordings. I'm going to assume, Chris, because this is from a while back, so you've probably accumulated more. And then in August 2024, he finalized a book deal with Casemate Publishers to have a book published for the 5th anniversary, which will be August of 2026. I still can't believe we're even on the 4th anniversary right now. I don't know where the time has gone, but Chris, I'm so glad to have you here. Before we get started, how many interviews are you at now and how many hours?
I don't think I've broken 300 hours yet. I'm 72 interviews. Yeah, I think 72 interviews now.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad to hear it. So today, you and I talked about this because you've heard so many stories. And, I want to give people some background. We were talking about what we wanted to record because when we first chatted, I had said that it would be so neat to go through day by day and kind of look at all the recollections that you have been able to hear and talking about how those days played out. But I think you wouldn't be able to do that in one episode. So today we're going to focus on 2 days. I'd love for you to give some background on why those 2 days were important, how many people you've spoken to about those days, and, just the broad overview before we drill down into specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. So, give you a little bit of background. Uh, Talk about a couple of things that happened in July of 2021, and then very quickly jump to 12 August, which is kind of when the word goes out about everything that's happening. Brief overview: 13, 14 August, not a whole lot happens on those 2 days. And then 15, 16 August, that's when, for lack of a better term, shit hits the fan. Everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And how the Marines and the soldiers on the ground, literally claw their way back from what could have been an absolute disaster, what's inside of what's already a tragedy.
Well, I'm definitely excited to hear about that. Excited is a bad word for this, but it always means a lot to me to be able to drill down into these things because, as I've said to you before, as I've said so many times before, so much of this is what I saw on TV, and it just doesn't even get into all of the minutia and the personal feelings that people had as they were going through this, which is why I think your work is so important. Hearing those personal details about these days, I'm really looking forward to it, and also steeling myself. And if I cry, I cry, and we move forward.
Yeah. But yeah, just briefly going back to July. So by July, the retrograde for all U.S. forces in Afghanistan has been in full swing for probably a month or two now. Things really kind of shut off towards the end of April when President Biden made the announcement on April 14th that we're going to zero for 100% by September 11th. Later, that will change to August 31st. But once that announcement comes out, that's when the retrograde, which before now is kind of talking to a lot of the 10th Mountain guys, 4th Battalion, 31st Infantry, 10th Mountain, who are on the ground. They're kind of wondering, is this retrograde actually happening? We're breaking these bases down, we're moving around here, we're doing this, we're doing that. But are we actually going to basically close the door on Afghanistan for the U.S.? After April 14th, that becomes a certainty. And then going into May, The That's end of April going into May. That's when the Taliban start their what will ultimately be their final offensive in the country. And at the same time, 431 and other U.S. forces in Afghanistan are kind of very rapidly wrapping things up at various bases around the country, eventually consolidating in Bagram Air Base, which is about 30 miles north of Kabul. And then by July 1st, going into July 2nd, Bagram's been cleared out. Everything's been shut down, more or less. 3rd Ranger Battalion comes in. They do a final sweep of the area. Early hours of July 2nd, everybody's on a plane and they're leaving. They're either going back to Kuwait, going somewhere else in CENTCOM AO, or for Charlie Company 431, for the Battalion Reconnaissance Platoon for 431, and a part of their Delta Company. They all get sent to Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul, and they basically set up shop there. July 12th, the retrograde is officially over for U.S. forces in Afghanistan. The only forces that are left are those in HKIA and those guarding the embassy. And then, yeah. July 14th, Operation Allies Refuge officially begins. There's only a handful of flights between July 14th and the actual evacuation in August that I'm aware of. I think about 2,500 people are actually flown out of the country in that time, which compared to what we'll get to in the evacuation is not a whole lot. And then kind of just jumping ahead to August. And yeah, I don't know if you have any questions right now before I start getting into it.
No, I think that's a good place to expectation set. BAF is always one of my most baffling moments where I can't help but shake my head, but we don't have to go we don't have to dwell on that. I think you're doing a great job.
Yeah. Uh, I will say just on the Bagram piece though, I think it was decided by I'm pretty sure it was decided by the State Department at some point in June that BAF was not going to be used for any potential evacuation. Uh, Pretty sure it was State Department. Don't have confirmation on that, but it definitely wasn't the DoD. So that comes around. I think it was either June 11th or June 12th when the actual signing ceremony for all the buildings, all the vehicles, all the equipment, everything that remained on Bagram. That signing ceremony took place. Basically, that was the official turnover of, like I said, any buildings, equipment, vehicles, anything like that. That was all turned over to the Afghan National Army officially. So one controversy I'll bring up is like people talk about, oh, we just up and left Bagram in the middle of the night without telling anybody. No, the Afghans knew we were leaving. They just didn't know exactly when, because why would we tell them exactly when? So, but they knew we were leaving. But yeah, fast forwarding to 12 August, uh, most all of the provincial capitals in Afghanistan have fallen by this point. There's only a handful left. I think about 4, including Kabul itself, that have not fallen yet to the Taliban. So the talking to some of the guys who were being kept up to date on the briefings and everything, it was kind of like there was this red wave or red area around Afghanistan, and it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it looked like there was a circle forming around Kabul, and it was getting tighter and tighter and tighter as you get into August. And so on August 12th, the decision is made that the Pentagon is going to send in more troops to support the mission there that is left. And starting in the U.S. itself, Eastern Time, between 13 and 1400 Eastern Time at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. At the time, I'm pretty sure it was called Fort Liberty, but now it's back to Bragg. Name changes are fun. The call Green Corvette goes out to the IRF or GRF. I'm pretty sure they're called the IRF now, but the name changes. People use it interchangeably. They're not wrong using it, but immediate reaction force or global reaction force. This is something that the 82nd Airborne does. Basically, there'll be one brigade from the division that'll be ready to go at all times, And when they get to call Green Corvette, basically what that means is that they have 2 hours to get all the paratroopers and everything in line, assemble, and be ready to go wherever it is they're going to go. And depending on who you ask from the brigade, that either went pretty smoothly or it went not so smoothly. And probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. Kind of just depends on who you were. I know talking to Ben Hofstetter, Captain Hofstetter, he was with the uh, 2nd Battalion, 501st Infantry, call sign Geronimo. They were in the middle of, or really the whole division, to my understanding, was in the middle of a comms changeover. So they're using one comms system, they're changing to another one. So they're still in the middle of that when they get the call. And even leaving Bragg, they're still in the middle of trying to work things out as far as that's concerned. Talking to the battalion commander for the 3rd Battalion, 319th Airborne Field Artillery, call sign Gun Devils. He's got troopers that are missing what he calls go to war plates, like enhanced savvy plates, the stuff that's actually rated for stopping rifle rounds and things of that nature. He's got troopers missing plates entirely. Some just have training plates. There's talk about food, water, ammunition. Most of those are pretty good to go, but the big thing is that the entire brigade has to make a movement to Joint Base South Carolina because the airfield that they would use on Bragg, Pope Airfield, is currently under construction, so they can't use that. So going into the night and early morning hours of the 12th to the 13th, they're making movement down there, getting set up, trying to figure out like who's priority for this, who's priority for that, who gets this ammunition, who gets that, so on and so forth. There is an order that emerges from the madness. It's decided that basically the flights get divided up into groups. For each group is about 3 or 4 planes. But brigade headquarters, at least part of brigade headquarters, along with part of 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry, call sign White Devils, and 3rd Battalion, 319th Field Artillery. They're all going to be part of the first group. They'll be the first ones to eventually go in when they do go in. But at this point in time, it is not their plan to just leave Charleston and immediately go into Kabul. The plan is to leave, get to Kuwait, get into CENTCOM AO, reconsolidate, assess the situation, and then plan from there. Unfortunately, that's not how things work out. But we'll get there when we get there. Trying to make sure I'm not skipping around here. But yeah, general overview, that's what's going on with the 82nd back in the United States. Very late at night, Kuwait time, in Ahmed Al Jaber Air Base in Kuwait. 24th MU, specifically Battalion Landing Team, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, BLT 18 for short. They've been in Kuwait for about 3 or 4 weeks now, acclimating to conditions, just kind of being on call, being on standby for anything that might happen to CENTCOM's AO. Obviously, the Afghanistan mission is first and foremost in their minds, even though a lot of guys are still thinking like, oh, we're just going to sit around Kuwait for a while, then eventually we're going to get back on the ship and go home. Or if we're lucky, we'll get to fly home. So it's not until, like I said, late that night on the 12th, Kuwait time, that the battalion leadership for 1-8 gets the word that, hey, we're going to Kabul. That gets disseminated down to the company level. All the company commanders, the lieutenants are informed. Talking to 1 or 2 of the guys on like E5s and below, sergeants and below, their leadership, they said like their leadership just kind of like disappeared. They didn't know where they went for a little while, so they kind of just left to their own devices. But it's the middle of the night; most of the guys are sleeping anyway. So, but yeah, leadership kind of goes away for a while, and apparently they're planning and everything, getting ready for this big movement that they're about to make, trying to assess the situation, get briefed on what's going on, what can they expect when they land, that kind of thing. And then around 2, 3, 4 in the morning, that's when the guys are notified, like, hey, we got a mission. We're going to Kabul. Everybody meet up on the basketball courts by 06. Get yourself together. they do so. Uh, Between 06 and 08, they assemble, or at least some of them do. Alpha Company is going to be the first to go for 1-8. So they assemble, and then a little while later, they bring out crates of ammunition. And it's really at this point when they realize, like, oh, we're probably actually going now. Some of them are still skeptical at this point. They think they're going to maybe get on a bus or maybe get on the flight line. They're going to get told at the last second, it's like, nope, we're not going. Everybody back to your rooms. That kind of thing. But yeah. So they get the ammunition loaded out, standard ammunition, 5.56, 7.62 by 51, ball ammunition, which is the standard ammunition you get in the military. Guys going in later will get another kind of ammunition, but we'll get into that if we get into that. Yeah, so they get the word. Alpha Company's the first to go. By about mid-morning, they finally get on a bus. They're taken to Ali Al Salim Air Base in Kuwait. They can't take off from Al Jaber directly because apparently, at least this is what I'm told, the runway can't support the size of C-17 aircraft, so they have to go to a bigger airfield where that can support that. And then later that afternoon, they finally get on a flight, and it's absolutely miserable on the aircraft itself. It got as high as, according to one of the guys talking to his lieutenant, it got as high as 140 degrees on the aircraft when they were just sitting there on the runway. So they're fully kitted out. They have their packs. They have their bulletproof vests. We call them flax. Helmets. Obviously, they're fully loaded down with a full combat load of ammunition. All their extra equipment and everything else. So it's very, very uncomfortable. And then they take off. They get relief from the heat briefly, but because of the altitude that C-17s fly, it gets very cold very quickly. So there's no happy medium there. They're either really hot or they're really cold, but it is what it is. Kind of just have to deal with it. And then they stop off in Qatar for a little bit, Al Udeid, get a little bit of a breather. Planes get refueled, pilots change out, and then they make the jump from there, which is about 5 to 6 hour flight to Kabul itself, flying south around Iran, because obviously we can't fly through Iran, up through Pakistan, and then make an western turn, towards Kabul. And they'll begin to land in Kabul after 8 p.m., 2000 hours on the night of the 13th. Friday the 13th, by the way. And actually talking to one of the Alpha Company guys very recently, the number 13 apparently comes up a lot. So landed on Friday the 13th, 13 days later is August 26th. Lose 13 of our brothers and sisters. So yeah, it's kind of a weird coincidence there.
Dang, man. That's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're into, I don't know, numerology or something like that, I don't know what you call it, but there's
Yeah,
something there maybe.
somebody needs to do some kind of, I don't know. It's not me, but if you're listening and you do that, hit me up. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. But yeah, so 2000 hours, they begin to land. The whole company is finally on the ground by 02 in the morning of August 14th. They're told on their way there when they're in Ali Al Salim, when they're in Al Udeid, to be prepared to gain contact with the enemy the second they step off the plane. So they have their ammunition, they're loaded up, they go condition 1, which is talks about the weapons conditions that you learn in the military. Condition 1 basically means that you have a fully loaded magazine inserted into the weapon, you have a round in the chamber, all you have to do is flip it on, fire, and pull the trigger. So they're expecting a fight as soon as they get off the plane. At least some of them are. And then, but they get there, they unload, they get off the plane, look around. It's just another day in Kabul. It's just another day on HKIA. There's nothing serious going on. People are just walking around. Some without weapons, like some army guys walking around. They see some National Guard guys, contractors, Afghan employees, Afghan workers, locally employed people. Not much serious is going on. So they find a place they link up with the units that are already there. They get settled down for the night. They get put up in an old office building, and they kind of do what young men do. They try to make the place livable. They find rooms that are decent, and they ransack the rest of the rooms for beds, chairs, whatever they can get their couches, whatever they can get their hands on to sleep on. So that's going into August 14th. They get up pretty late that day, at least late by Marine standards. Most of the guys they don't wake up before like 07 in the morning, and there's really not a whole lot for them to do yet. They're just still figuring out where they're at, what's going on, what needs to be done. And the Charlie Company 10th Mountain guys, I'll call them Task Force Polar Bear from now on because Polar Bear is like their unit mascot, so I'll just call them Task Force Polar Bear from now on. They link up with them, and Task Force Polar Bear is excited because the Marines coming in, that's supposed to be their relief because the first wave of Task Force Polar Bear landed in Afghanistan Thanksgiving Day, November 25th, 2020. So they're there for nearly 10 months by this point. They're looking forward to going home. And they're supposed to leave on 16 August. That's when their flights are supposed to take them, at the very least, out of Afghanistan back to Kuwait, and then hopefully soon after that back home. So the Marines being there for them is a very good sign. And also another unit that is on HKIA by this point that was also, I believe they touched down in Afghanistan in March, I'm pretty sure. They're called Task Force Talent collectively. These are elements of 3rd General Support Aviation Battalion, also part of the 82nd Airborne Division. Like I said, they've been in Afghanistan since, I'm pretty sure, March. I might be wrong on that. I'm sure if somebody's listening to this knows, they'll correct me on it. I'm pretty sure it was March. And they're, and it's generally speaking, 3 flight companies. Alpha Company, which flies the AH-64 Apaches. Bravo Company, which is flying the Chinooks. And then a Charlie Company, which is flying the Blackhawks. And they were kind of similar to what was going on with Task Force Polar Bear. They're scattered around Afghanistan, flying things from here to there, providing security where it's needed, et cetera, et cetera. But also, by the time Bagram closes, they're kind of cut down to a skeleton crew, and what's left of them is sent. Most of them are sent back to Kuwait, and then the rest are sent on forward to HKIA. And so they've been operating out of Ramp 10, which is called Camp Alvarado. Primarily, this is like a State Department compound. It's where most of the State Department contractors, personnel, besides those that are in the embassy, this is where they're staying. This is where they're operating out of. They have their own flight crews, they have, and all of that kind of stuff, including something that I found to be very interesting. Shit, now that I have to think about it, I'm going to get the airframe designation wrong. I think it's like CH-45 Frog, which is kind of like the predecessor to the Chinook, I'm pretty sure. One of those frogs was actually used during the 1975 evacuation from Saigon. So, yeah,
Wow.
little piece of history is still being used with the State Department overseas.
Interesting.
There's a bit of a tragic story behind that particular aircraft, but we probably won't get to that. But if we do, I'll talk about it a little bit. But so yeah, they're operating out of Ramp 10. That's where all their aircraft are, but they've been staying over on Ramp 8, which I don't know if you have well, there's a share function. I don't know if you want me to use it or not for the screen.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, because things are going to get complicated here a little bit, just to, like, give people an idea of where everything is at. Okay. So you can see my screen okay?
Yep.
All right, so more or less, this is the entire city of Kabul, Afghanistan. Zooming in all of these little markers that I made up. Uh, this whole area here, this is Hamid Karzai International Airport. And it's more or less divided up into, well, it's first of all split into two halves. The northern half, this is called the military side of Kabul. Military side of HKIA. And then you have the southern half, which is generally considered the civilian side or Afghan side of HKIA. And kind of dividing it further, focusing on the north side. Uh, this whole section you see here, excuse me, this is called Ramp 8. Some guys, talking to some guys, whenever they refer to HKIA, they're talking specifically about this area as well. So it gets a little confusing sometimes, but you can call it North HKIA, Ramp 8, HKIA proper. This is probably what they're talking about, this area here. Immediately to the west of that, you have ramp number 9. For the most part, this is basically the territory of the Afghan National Air Force. They have a training grounds here. They have all their aircraft here, at least they used to. They have their, pretty sure, the pilot school here, a cadet school there. This is basically the center of all Afghan National Air Force operations. And then immediately to the west of that, you have Ramp 10, aka Camp Alvarado. And this is where the State Department has been operating out of in conjunction with the U.S. Embassy itself. And so prior to August 14th, Task Force Talon has all their airframes on Camp Alvarado, but all their personnel, or at least the vast majority of the personnel, are staying on Ramp 8 or HKIA proper. So to get to work every day, they've been having to traverse this, and it doesn't look that far on the map, but it's quite a maze, and it actually takes a minute to get through all of this, especially when you have the Afghan Air Force doing their thing on their schedule, conflicting with that. Excuse me. But on Happy Days on August 14th, they finally get to move from Ramp 8 over to Camp Alvarado, so they get to actually live where they work, more or less. So they're very happy and excited about that morning. And kind of going forward with that, by August 14th, the 82nd, all of 1st Brigade, to my knowledge, is on the move, minus parts of 2nd Battalion, 501st Geronimo. They're still back in the States getting ready to move. The biggest problem with all these movements is just really it's airframes, and I can't talk about the source where I got this from or anything like that, but there's very limited airframes in CENTCOM's AO for these really big movements to go on. I can't remember the number exactly, but it's only like a couple of dozen of C-17s that are in CENTCOM this time. And when these orders start going out, you start bringing these guys in, the call goes out and you're bringing in aircraft from the US, you're bringing in aircraft from Europe, from Asia, from other parts of the world to support these missions. Which also leads into the frustration that Charlie Company 1-8 is having, because they were supposed to leave immediately after Alpha Company and arrive there not long after them. They load up on a bus, they're ready to go on mid to late afternoon of August 13th. As soon as everybody's on the bus ready to go, they get told, hey guys, we're delayed, we're staying here another night, everybody off. Which is a real blow to the morale. We get all hyped up, ready to go, and then it's like, nope, we're not actually going. Well, screw you too, I guess. But yeah, they don't get loaded up onto an aircraft until really about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning on August 15th, finally. But we'll get there when we get there. Back in the United States, at about between 3:30 and 4:30, Yeah, I wrote that down wrong in my timeline. Yeah, but yeah. 3:30 to 4:30, there's a National Security Council meeting that takes place, and basically the purpose of that is to discuss, okay, NEO's probably going to happen. How's it going to look? How are the different departments going to work together to get this done, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll just highlight a few points from that meeting. Who's eligible for evacuation going into this NEO? U.S. citizens living in Afghanistan, including their family, U.S. government direct hire and third country contract staff, U.S. Embassy Afghanistan locally employed staff, regardless of how long they were employed, Afghan contract staff of U.S. Embassy, CIA priority partners, Afghan SIV applicants who are post chief of mission, so people who are well into the SIV process.
Interesting how they prioritized the zero units then, but then didn't prioritize them once they got to the US, because all the zeros now are losing work authorization or losing their jobs because they're about to run out of work authorization because they didn't prioritize their SIVs. And yeah, but we don't have to get into that. Let's go forward. Go on,
Yeah.
Chris.
And then as far as the ideal pace that this was going to take place, bullet point, DoD in coordination with state task force will seek to manifest at least 5,000 individuals for relocation per day from Afghanistan. So it's a pretty ambitious number.
Yeah, they blew that out of the water though, didn't they?
Oh yeah, considering about days that evacuations were actually taking place, evacuation flights were actually taking place, they far exceeded that on some days.
Mhm.
Most days, I would say.
Interesting. I'm oh wow. Let's keep going. I'm learning a lot here. This is really cool.
Yeah. So that meeting takes place. I'll get into that, but at the time the meeting takes place in Eastern Standard Time, in Kabul time, it's about 2:30 in the morning. But I'll get there when I get there in a second. Uh, Back in HKIA, around between 18 to 2200, so from 6 to 10 o'clock, the the Czech Republic Embassy, I almost said Czechoslovakia, they don't exist anymore, my bad. The Czech Republic Embassy is removing all their personnel, or beginning to remove their personnel from their embassy and moving them to HKIA. That evening, 1st Platoon Alpha Company 1/8 is tasked out to the PAX terminal, which I'll share my screen again here. So they're tasked out to the PAX terminal, which is on ramp 8. It's this building here. Whenever you hear guys refer to the PAX terminal, more than likely this is what they're talking about. The purpose for being sent there is that the embassy is decreasing their footprint, or is starting to decrease their footprint. So embassy personnel are being flown in from the embassy, and they're going to be processed through the terminal. 1st Platoon Alpha Company is being sent there to kind of help in that process. And at least the one guy that I've talked to from Alpha Company was it wasn't a great experience for him because uh, in no uncertain terms, he basically described it as like he and the other guys that were around him felt like the State Department's little bitch boys, like bag boys. There wasn't a lot of gratitude shown towards them, and they were, at least he was pretty embittered towards the State Department personnel because he felt like the only reason that they were there is because they failed their job. So there's a little animosity there. Around 7:30 or 1930, Task Force 6, which is a British Special Operations unit down here on Ramp 6 on the civilian side, they inform U.S. Command that the British Embassy has been moved to HKIA. They are on HKIA. And then just a little something of note, nothing serious came from it, just a little something of note. Around 10:27 or 22:27, 100 hours, some of the CCTV cameras on HKIA go down. The Turks, who are going back a little bit, trying not to jump around too much here, but going back to July, the previous month, the Turks had signed a security agreement with NATO, with the rest of NATO, that the Turkish armed forces would be in charge of the security of HKIA, at least the NATO portions of it, which is Ramp 8 primarily, but also some of the eastern parts of HKIA as well. But they put up a request for PTIDs, which are what PTIDs are basically these big balloons that usually fly over U.S. bases and whatnot, usually like FOBs or larger bases. I never got to work with anybody I was in, but I've heard nothing but great things about them. Same thing with the guys that were there on the ground. Loaded with some of the best cameras that you can possibly imagine. See miles away. Really zoom in on people and can tell what's going on around you. So they put in a request to for the PTIS to start a scan every 30 minutes around HKI until those cameras can come back up. There's nothing else said about them, so I'm assuming they did. But anyway, now we're getting into the fun part, if you want to call it that. So now we're finally into the early morning of August 15th. At some point during the night, Jalalabad officially surrenders to the Taliban. And that was the last provincial capital besides Kabul itself to fall into their hands. Sometime in the early morning, through social media, rumors start going around the city that the Taliban are actually in Kabul itself. I haven't seen anything to confirm these rumors. My best guess from what I know and from what I've heard is that what this likely is that there are Taliban cells inside Kabul. There have been for years. As recently as August 4th, they conducted an attack on the Ministry of Defense in Kabul. They've done car bombs, assassinations, all kinds of stuff in the city. So, like I said, they've been there for years. So, my theory is that as the main Taliban forces are getting closer and closer, these cells are becoming more and more active, leading people to believe that the Taliban is in the city in force. But again, it's probably not true. Another theory is that local gangs or thugs around the city, anybody with guns, are trying to stake their claim to certain parts, this, that, or the other, certain territories. So that could be part of it as well. But anyway, so another note, around just before 1 o'clock in the morning, there's a report that the Taliban have begun large-scale attacks in the Pagman district, which is about little under 13 miles west of HKIA. And there's reports that the Taliban leadership is claiming that this is the part of the final assault on Kabul itself. At around 1:10, two of Task Force Talon's Apaches take off to make deterrence flights in the vicinity of Poli Charki prison, which is a few miles east of Kabul. Purpose of those flights is to deter a Taliban advance from that direction, as well as deter any possibility of basically a prisoner blowout, prisoner escape from that prison as well. And then around 01, sometime between 01 and 02, like so 4, that's when Charlie Company finally takes off. Charlie Company 1-8 finally takes off on their way to HKIA. And again, that's around the same time that the National Security Council meeting is going on. So a lot of things are happening very quickly. And a little after 3 o'clock in the morning, personnel and vehicles from various embassies beginning arriving in HKIA. Just before 4 o'clock, these include the Netherlands and the Czech embassies. Just before dawn, around 5:10, a C-130 lands with mechanical issues. And it's around dawn itself when Charlie Company finally arrives on HKIA. And the couple guys that I've talked to from Charlie Company noted that unlike the kind of atmosphere that greeted the Alpha Company guys, they kind of had a feeling that something was going on and something was up. So things had changed since August 13th, for sure. By 6 o'clock, those Apaches have returned. They report a large crowd gathering southwest of the prison. They There's no identification beyond that. And they also noted that there is a warehouse that is on fire about 2 miles to the east of HKIA. Does that have anything to do with anything? Not sure. Just something they noted. Between 7 and 7:12, the Finnish and French vehicles begin arriving on HKIA, probably from their embassies. Between 07 and 08, 1st Platoon, Alpha Company 1-8 are finally allowed to return to try and get some rest. And it's estimated that they supported the processing of 600 U.S. Embassy personnel during that night. Around 9 o'clock, Task Force Town spins up to support the evacuation of the U.S. Embassy. The evacuation call has officially gone out. So they're going to be making flights pretty much all day, however long it takes, however many they need to make until the embassy is completely evacuated. So that starts around 09:30. And on some of the first flights where they're taking off, talking to Chief Warrant Officer Terrence Bailey, who's one of the pilots for the Chinooks, when he is taking off to go towards the embassy, he notes he sees a large crowd of Afghans who were employed on HKIA. He sees them leaving the airport and making their way into the city. And that was kind of his first impression, like, something's going on here, something's up. 9:25, a line has formed of about 40 civilians outside of Abbey Gate seeking entry into HKIA. And then this is just a note that throughout this day, in the morning, in the afternoon, a lot of people, with the kind of tension that's in the air, knowing about the Taliban advances, not exactly sure how far they have advanced, how, if they're in the city, how close are they to the city, etc., etc. A lot of people either hunker down in their homes, they try to go to various embassies to try and use whatever legal status they can get. As the ones I've previously mentioned, going to Abbey Gate, some of them try to go to the airport. Some of them have scheduled flights for that day. A lot of people from some of the accounts that I've read in books written by others, a lot of people have flights scheduled for August 16th. But we'll see how that plays out here in a minute. But banks are a big target as well. Just people going to banks trying to get their money so they actually have like physical cash in their hands. And it gets pretty bad that the banks begin to shut down. People are still trying to get in. The armed guards of the banks begin to fire warning shots to try and discourage people, to try and disperse the crowds. And then some of these warning shots get mistaken for firefights between the ANA or ASF and the Taliban. And that'll come into play here in a little bit. Around 1100, the Task Force Polar Bear First Sergeant, Master Sergeant Andrew Kelly, he comes back from taking the Alpha Company 1-8 CO, Major McGurry now, Captain McGurry at the time, over to Camp Alvarado to link up with Task Force Talon. This is like one of the last things that Task Force Polar Bear has to do with the Marines to actually turn over the mission to them so they can leave the next day. They're still planning on that. There's also a rehearsal scheduled between Task Force Polar Bear and the Marines, I think around 2 o'clock, 1400 that afternoon. And then around 1200, reports start coming in of possible Taliban on Apron 4 on HKIA. As far as I'm aware, this was not actually the case, but reports are coming in saying that there were. And that one of the air traffic control towers is being evacuated. At 12:21, this is when things finally begin to pop off. So everything that's happened before is kind of recognizing tension and kind of building tension. At 12:21, that tension kind of begins to break, because this is the first instance mentioned that shots are actually fired.
I was going to say, not to be specific or anything like that. That's very specific. Okay, shots
Yeah.
fired. Tell me, let's hear about that.
Yeah. Well, I get to be this specific, thankfully, to previously mentioned Andrew Kelly, he's retired now, but he retired as Master Sergeant. He was Charlie Company Task Force Polar Bear's first sergeant at the time. Uh, he gave me the talk logs, or at least some of the talk logs that they had. So that's been immensely helpful in especially planning out these couple of days, which end up being, in my opinion, very monumental to the evacuation as a whole.
That's so cool to have that as a resource.
Yeah. So most of the times that I'm reading out coming from or thanks to him. So shout out to him. He's a great dude. And very experienced stuff. He'd been in the army since like 2005, 2006. Went through the surge in Iraq, surge in Afghanistan. Deployed. He was actually deployed to Afghanistan just back in 2019 when he was the platoon sergeant for the battalion's recon platoon. And now he's the company first sergeant. So 12/21, warning shots are fired on ramp 6. What has happened is that some Afghan pilots are trying to defect and they're attempting to commandeer a plane. So Task Force Polar Bear sends a platoon out there to put a stop to that. And then kind of harkening back to that report at 1200 that there were Taliban on the airfield. At 1222, a report comes in from the Afghan Border Police commander. So the Afghan Border Police have a presence in HKIA, at least for right now. He reports back that there are no Taliban, but to his knowledge, they are on their way. At 1225, contractors in Afghan Air Force are consolidating on ramp 9. And at 1241, those contractors, to my understanding, most of these are Garda World contractors. They self-evac to ramp 8. And talking to a lot of the guys that get in on the 15th and going into the 16th as well, is that a lot of these contractors, they're there and then all of a sudden they're not there. So they're getting on planes at some point in this time. Whatever planes are leaving, they're getting on them. And then at 1247, Task Force Polar Bear's first platoon, again, on move to ramp 6. They're being sent to deal with that situation down there with the Afghan pilots. And then at 1258, a very alarming report comes in that an estimated 40 to 50 Taliban armed with AKs and RPGs are 2 miles south of the U.S. Embassy coming into the city. At 1308, first platoon returns. And then immediately after that, 1309, a very disturbing scene plays out, at least for the U.S. forces on HKIA. The Afghan guards that are supposed to be at Northgate on HKIA. I'll pull up the screen again. So going back to ramp 8, Northgate is this northernmost point here. The Afghan guards that are supposed to be in charge of that gate, they're seen changing over to civilian clothes and then just leaving the gate open behind them, not closing it. And then it's also observed about 20 minutes later that the guard towers around Camp Alvarado over on ramp 10, they appear to be unoccupied, unmanned. And part of what has happened there is that the Afghan security forces are just straight up leaving. Also, the State Department had contracted Gurkhas from the British military to act as their security force as well. The Gurkhas have been pulled back into their own compound on HKIA, and the same thing is something similar is happening for the Turkish forces as well. Basically, everybody knows something is happening. They're not exactly sure what is happening, so they're trying to consolidate and figure it out before actually doing anything. Kind of leaving the U.S. forces to clean up, as you'll see play out here going into the afternoon. And again, that starts immediately at 1336, 1:36 in the afternoon. 3 platoons, 1st, 3rd, and 4th, to my understanding, are sent out to Camp Alvarado, one of the air traffic control towers, as well as Ramp 6 to try and plug holes that they're beginning to see more and more of that are being left open by the pulling out of the Afghan security forces. And then the Marines get involved in that as well with 2nd Platoon Alpha Company 1-8. They get sent to a relatively small gate. They get sent to a small gate at the western edge of Ramp 8 or HKIA proper. This gate right here, if you can see it on the screen. And upon arriving at that gate, which is a little bit after 3 o'clock, probably around 3:15 or so, maybe, a radio call comes back to the MU headquarters, the 1-8 battalion headquarters, and the 2nd platoon commander is calling tick, 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 which is an acronym meaning troops in contact. What has happened is that upon arriving at that gate, they began to receive sniper fire. It is not effective. No Marines are shot. No Marines are wounded. Talking to one of the guys who was attached to 2nd platoon, he was a javelin gunner attached to 2nd platoon. The rounds coming overhead were kind of whizzing, which implies that they were subsonic, which means that it was either a small caliber round or they were just at a pretty great distance, and he's pretty sure that whoever was shooting at him was a fair distance off. So, not very effective, but this is the first real report that American forces, and specifically the Marines, have begun to take fire on HKIA. So that's the significance of that. It is not long after that poor 1st platoon, after being up all night, they get sent out now to kind of protect the right flank of 2nd platoon, setting up along the northern northern wall of HKIA proper, or Ramp 8. And it's also around this time, around 3:30 or so, that the Afghan National Security Advisor, Hamdullah Mahib, approaches President Ashraf Ghani after hearing gunfire go off relatively close to the presidential palace. Again, believing that this could possibly be Taliban trying to get in, Taliban getting into the city. It might just be bank guards trying to disperse the crowds. It might be police trying to disperse crowds. It could be a number of things. According to an interview that he gave, he approached President Ghani and said, "If we're going to leave, the time is now." And even though President Ghani just the day before had made a short video and sent it out to the Afghan people, preaching defiance, encouraging them to defy the Taliban's advance, to fight for Afghanistan against this war that, as he says, has been pushed upon the Afghan people, concedes, makes a decision, and him and some of his remaining staffers, those who have not already fled, make their way to their helicopters. They lift off, and as far as anyone at the time is concerned, they just up and disappear. Nobody knows where they're going. Nobody knows where they went. And eventually that word is going to get around. Actually, it gets around pretty quickly on social media in Kabul, and where the rumors had people kind of in a tizzy a little bit. These reports about the president leaving has people losing hope and at the same time being very, very angry. And it's also this time that several of the Afghan National Army units, Afghan Security Forces units that are left in the city, a lot of them just up and quit. Because at this point, what are they fighting for? The government that they were supporting is, as far as they're concerned, just abandoned them. So, it's also around this time, between 3:30 and 4:30, that Charlie Company 1-8 finally gets put into the action. And for one company of Marines, it's quite a task they're given. Basically, they get sent across the entire northern perimeter of Hamid Karzai International Airport, not just Ramp 8, the entire northern perimeter. That's all the way from Blackgate all the way down to Abbey Gate. Uh, I measured it. The entire perimeter is about 5.5 kilometers. For one company of Marines, that's quite a stretch. And while they're getting sent out there to this perimeter, going back to the map of Hamid Karzai International Airport, again, you got ramp 8, ramp 9, ramp 10, or Camp Alvarado. And this marker I have here, I call it Blackgate. I've heard it's called many names: Liberty Gate, Glory Gate, even as simple as ECP-1, which is what some of the paratroopers that'll come later, that's what they'll call it. First Platoon, Charlie Company 1-8, is sent out here to occupy this gate, and upon their arrival, they're greeted by several armed men in trucks, loaded up with machine guns, RPGs, etc. They have no idea who these guys are, and it's kind of a very awkward standoff between the Marines and whoever these people are. And eventually, after kind of like a Charlie Company commander, Captain Reap, kind of described it as a Mexican standoff. Eventually, it kind of just ends, and the guys in the trucks just leave. And it's not too long after that that Captain Reap is informed, that President Ghani and effectively the Afghan government has left the country. And staying on the map, going down to the south side of the airport, going to the civilian terminals here, you have the civilian international terminal on the left here, the west side. And to the right, you have the smaller domestic / regional airport terminal there. And it's around 4:30 or 16:29 hours that the civilian terminal, it doesn't specify which, but I'm fairly certain it's this one based on the way that guys have talked about it in the interviews, begins to receive small arms fire. About 10 minutes later, reports come in around 1640 that there is a possible ISIS-K rocket attack that is going to take place from the west. This does not materialize, but this is reports that they're getting in. Going over to Abbey Gate, a little after 5 o'clock. So you have, again, Marines from Charlie Company, Charlie Company's 2nd Platoon specifically, along with some U.S. contractors still on the ground. They note a small object getting thrown over one of the walls. The contractor goes over there to investigate, looks down. It is a small Nokia phone, and he picks it up to examine it. And when he does, it detonates. It is a cell phone IED and nearly blows his hand off. And one of the squad leaders from 2nd Platoon applies a tourniquet, some first aid, and he gets sent over to Roll 2, is later declared stable. Yeah, so this is to my knowledge, the first reported actual U.S. casualty, U.S. contractor during this time.
Yeah, I never heard about that. That's so interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah. I think I heard about it talking to the 10th Mountain guys first, and then when I talked to a guy from Charlie Company, again from Charlie Company's 2nd Platoon, Lance Corporal Andrew Laidler, it was his platoon, his squad that was in that area at the time. Again, it was his squad leader that applied first aid. And about 40 minutes after that, not even, in the same area, Charlie Company, at least the elements that are there around Abbey Gate, began to receive fire actually from the north. So across the airport, across the flight line. They don't know where it's coming from. They can't identify any shooters. It's likely some kind of crew served machine gun, some kind of high caliber weapon to just shoot that kind of a distance. And it's kind of a note as well, as like around noon when the call went out for that when that call went out and the task force polar bear platoons are getting sent out across HKIA. Uh, First Sergeant Kelly remembers getting that call. He literally just sat down to eat, and he was in the middle of eating a hot dog when that call comes in. So gets it, gets out there, and he looks around. And he knows that it was like everything just lit up, like the hillsides, the city. There was gunfire everywhere. Not necessarily directed at the airport entirely, but there was just gunfire everywhere. And then shortly after, Charlie Company reports receiving fire from the north. They also begin to receive fire from the east of Abbey Gate, which, apart from the Barron Hotel, which is occupied by contractors of various nations, in the residential areas as well as the hotels that are kind of in that area, they begin to receive fire from these locations. They can't identify any shooters, or at least mostly they can't identify any shooters. The fire is sporadic, and it's not very effective, but apparently it was heavy enough for them to request a quick reaction force to come and support their position. And they'll be receiving fire on a relatively regular basis, basically for the next 4 hours. And then around 1840, a report comes in that all Afghan border police towers, including their armory, everything south of Camp Alvarado, has been abandoned. A little after 7:30, a Japanese delegation arrives on HKIA. At 7:46, 5 American citizens are processed through Southgate. They come on HKIA now. And then shortly after they're admitted, things are getting so chaotic with people trying to get in HKIA with the fire that they're taking that at 7:55 or 19:55 hours, all traffic in or out is halted. HKIA basically shuts down temporarily. And then while that is going on, literally a minute later, Task Force Polar Bear's 4th Platoon, they're down by Southgate, and they note that a vehicle is trying to ram through the gate to gain access onto HKIA. They don't know if it's civilian, Taliban, it's not noted. And then another chilling call comes in just after 8 o'clock, 2000 hours. The embassy reports to HKIA that the Taliban are inside the presidential palace, which is literally just like a mile, if that, down the road from the U.S. Embassy. And then a few minutes after that, at 20:07, personnel are seen changing clothes on ramp 9. As far as the talk log from the 10th Mountain is concerned, they're unable to identify this as friendly or not. I actually found this in a book I was reading, which I can't remember the title of now. Ask me about it later and I'll tell you the title. To my knowledge, this lines up with an account that I was reading in that book. These are members of the Afghan Reconnaissance Unit. Basically, these guys are Afghan Special Forces, and they're the Special Forces of the Special Forces. They're like DevGru, CAG, Delta equivalents for the Afghan Army. These are very highly trained, both by the U.S. Special Forces as well as CIA. Very motivated, very well-trained group of dudes. So the book I was just referencing was August in Kabul, America's Last Days in Afghanistan, which is actually written by Australian photojournalist and reporter, freelancer Andrew Quilty. I'm assuming I'm saying that name right. I know Aussies can be weird sometimes, but yeah. So this is a story that he interviewed for, and so the ARU, Afghan Reconnaissance Unit, they had left Camp Scorpion earlier that day, which was kind of like a mix between ANA Special Forces / American CIA compound. The CIA had left by March of 2021. And it's about 10 miles east of Kabul. And his account specifically falls a young Captain Arman Malik. Basically, he was ordered by his superiors to break everything down at the camp, load up on what trucks they could, and head to HKIA, where the rest of the last remaining Americans were. The day before, he had got all of his guys together and said, like, hey, the country's falling. I won't hold anything against you guys. If you want to go home to your families, look after them, find your own way to get out, or make your way to the resistance in Panjshir. You do you. Hold nothing against you. A lot of guys left that night. At least enough left that night that when it comes time to make this movement on 15 August, him and the guys that are left have to call in family members to come in and man machine guns on the trucks to plus up their security. And if I'm remembering correctly from that account as well, like on the highway to HKIA, they're passing civilian vehicles, either getting into or getting out of the city. And he notes that people are staring at him and the rest of his guys. And it's not looks of anger or anything like that, like, you should have fought harder for us, etc., etc. He's not getting any of those kinds of looks. Him and his soldiers are getting looks of pity more than anything else. Because I think the Afghan people knows what'll probably happen to them if the Taliban catch them. And it's also just pity of the whole situation that what they had fought for so long is now unraveling right before them. So it's good book. Good book. Highly recommend. Yeah. So when they eventually do make it onto HKIA that evening, going into the night, he gathers them up again on ramp 9 and basically like gives them the guys that are left gives them the same offer that he gave the guys the day before. Is like, hey, if you guys, the president's gone, the government's gone, you guys want to go home, no hard feelings, just go home. And a lot of the ones who had not left previously choose at that moment that's them, they're going to leave. So I'm assuming, I have no specific evidence to this, but I feel like with that mention from the talk log, with that story, I'm pretty sure that's what was going on at that time. So, and then finally mentioning the 82nd again, around 8:12 that night, that's when the first flight from the 82nd touches down, and they will have part of the brigade headquarters, again just a part, as well as Alpha Company 2nd Battalion 504th. And I've talked to a handful of guys from there, and one of the things that they were lacking, various parts of 1st Brigade were lacking various things. One of the things that Alpha Company specifically was lacking was ammunition, especially 7.62 by 51 ammunition for their designated marksman rifles. And so while they're on the plane flying from Kuwait and Qatar to Kabul, they are taking apart 240 belts, referencing the 240 Bravo machine gun, taking apart 240 belts to get the ammunition for their rifles. But anyway, they touch down after 8 o'clock. They're on touchdown on ramp 8. Very conveniently for them, not long after they get unloaded, they're not supposed to be on ramp 8. They're actually supposed to be on ramp 10 over by Camp Alvarado. But it just so happens that at that moment, some Chinooks land nearby, dropping off embassy personnel. So they go up, talk to the crews, talk to the pilots, be like, hey, we need to get over here. Do you guys mind giving us a look? He's like, yeah, sure, we're heading that way anyway, hop on. So just gave him a ride right over there. A few minutes after that, Brigadier General Sami Sadat, who is most of his story was pretty well accounted for leading up to this by the I would probably say now disgraced documentary Retrograde, which was on Hulu. But yeah, so he's just a couple days before this, or a few days before this, he's placed in command of all Afghan security forces, any remaining Afghan National Army forces, still in Kabul, which is kind of like a not a great promotion considering the circumstances, but he's going to make the best out that he could. He's reporting to the U.S. forces that there are gunmen. He doesn't specify Taliban, ISIS, or anything like that. He just says there are gunmen, armed individuals inside the civilian half of HKIA. But U.S. forces are unable to confirm that at the time. Just before 8:30, the Indian delegation arrives, and about 20 minutes after that, there's reports of they see straight up. You can see tracer fire going from south to north, just flying right over HKIA. And then just after 9 o'clock on the 15th, Southgate is receiving small arms fire. These civilian side, the civilian terminals, they're receiving small arms fire once again. And then now the U.S. Embassy is sending out requests to Task Force Talon in earnest to get the evacuation really going. And for the next several minutes at 9 o'clock, Task Force Polar Bear 1st Platoon, seeing civilians fleeing the civilian terminal. They report seeing gunmen as well. 4th Platoon, Task Force Polar Bear reports Abbey is receiving small arms fire pretty regularly every 15 minutes. And then Task Force Polar Bear 1st Platoon again reports they see 3 gunmen on the 2nd floor of the civilian terminal. And kind of referencing Abbey once again, talking about the Charlie Company element that is there. Again, talking to Lance Corporal Lather, who was there. He remembers getting into at least five distinct engagements. Most of that was just them receiving fire, but a couple of opportunities they actually got to return fire as well when they could actually positively identify gunmen. Did they actually eliminate anybody? Unclear, but at least a couple of times they did get to shoot back. And I'll get into one of those stories here in a second. Uh, 2132, Task Force Talon reports a helo, one of their Chinooks taking ineffective fire as they're leaving the embassy. I talked to the crew chief that was on board that Chinook when that took fire. And it was actually kind of a funny moment for him because, well, he saw the tracers fly up right past the helicopter. Thankfully, it didn't hit the rotors, didn't hit the aircraft. But he looked down and he saw the truck and he saw the guy in the truck that was shooting at him. And he just calls up over the intercom. He's like, I got him. Which signals to the pilots immediately think that he's just shot somebody, which is not what he did. He just saw him. But you're supposed to be very clear with your words and exactly what you're doing and what you mean. It's just a little funny moment. And then another funny moment that kind of happens with the Chinooks. Obviously, they're loaded down with flares just in case they take any kind of missile or rocket fire to try to deflect that. And when you're coming into land, you're supposed to turn those off. Well, one of the pilots, one of the kind of new-ish pilots, forgets to turn his flares off. So as they're coming into land on ramp 8, they start spitting flares out on the ground and light the grass on fire around ramp 8, which just so happens to be where some of the Marine air traffic controllers have set up trying to coordinate things. So they have to quickly evacuate and set up somewhere else until the fire gets put out.
Oh my gosh. How did I not know any of these, any of these incidents? It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, there's more than this, but I'm just trying to. Yeah, I'm being very detailed as it is, but there's more to it than that. Kind of going back to the civilian airports as well. The snipers for Task Force Polar Bear, they report seeing 12 to 15 individuals on the 2nd floor of the civilian terminal. They can't identify any weapons at the time, but one of the squad leaders for 1st Platoon, he said he remembers things a little bit differently. Staff Sergeant Stephen Kirshner, before he was with the Army, he was Marine. Pretty sure he was with 6th Regiment, deployed with them back when he was in the Marines. Eventually joined the Army, got sent to 10th Mountain, etc. Not going to get into all that. But he recalls receiving fire from these gunmen. They weren't engaging first platoon specifically, but kind of talking about, harking back to earlier, seeing civilians running away from that terminal. He says the gunmen were shooting at the civilians that were running away, but because the civilians were running towards them and in their direction, the fire was kind of coming towards them. So, yeah. And then just before 10 o'clock, cameras spot about 40 civilians approaching ramp 9 from the civilian terminal. So these are civilians who have gotten through these civilian terminals on the south side. They're crossing the tarmac on their way to ramp 9 to where they see parked aircraft. And then a QRF platoon is sent to try to stop them. And between 9 and 10 o'clock, kind of in conjunction with this, Alpha Company 1-8 has been pulled back to reconsolidate, and they're tasked with a new mission to go support what Captain McGurry, at the time Captain McGurry, describes as a Tier 1 unit to support them in a developing hostage situation. Basically, what has happened is that some Afghan security forces that are trying to defect, they've taken a couple of journalists hostage to demand a flight out of the country.
Did that ever get reported?
I don't think so, no.
Oh my gosh. I mean, but it shows the level of desperation, that like they know what's coming for them and like get me out of here before it does.
Yeah. And it's between 10 and 11 o'clock. This is when you hear the reports of like the crowds, at least the initial crowds, flooding onto the airport. This is when that begins to happen. It's not mentioned specifically in the talk log, but talking to the guys that were there, this is more or less when that begins to happen. So that group of about 40 civilians that are on the way to ramp 9, that's just part of the problem. That's just part of the crowds that are coming. And kind of along those lines as well. Well, actually, let's get into this. 2207 and 1007. That same group that I just referenced, it says now that they've increased from 40 to 150. And then literally a minute later, not even a minute later, they've increased to 200. And if I'm getting my references correct, again, going back to the account of Staff Sergeant Kirshner, and as well as, and I have footage of this from Sergeant Ben Seal, who's one of the snipers with Task Force Polar Bear. There's a C-17 that is parked on the ramp, and these civilians that are flooding towards them, they're just walking right onto it, not caring about the Air Force personnel, not caring about the armed personnel that's already there. They're just walking right onto it, and they're walking onto it, sitting down, just like waiting to get taxied and lift off. And first platoon, Task Force Polar Bear, and some other guys as well, they're being sent there. I was like, hey, go get these people off the plane. And after several minutes of like getting them off, okay, let them back on. Oh, we'll just take them. All right, get them back off again. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They drag as many of them off as they can, and then whoever's left on the plane just locks up, loads up, taxis, and just takes off. So that was one of the low moments that Staff Sergeant Kirshner, where I was like, yeah, we went through all that effort to try and force them off, and then they ended up taking whatever was left anyway, so why not just leave the rest of them on there? It was one of the things he felt bad about. And then just before 10:30, Task Force Talon reports 4 trucks attempting to gain access to ramp 10, and they're requesting assistance from the Marines and the Army. And then about 20 minutes later, an unspecified number of people are approaching East Gate, which is just north of Abbey Gate. And then around, again, like I said before, around 11-ish, that's when the large crowds start massing and moving south to north. And estimates at the time range from about 400 to 1,000, possibly more. I know some reports that came out later estimate as many as 10 to 15,000. I don't think it was quite that many, but it was a good bit. And this is when the call gets put out for basically all the Marines, all the 10th Mountain soldiers that are out there. Task Force Polar Bear basically gets wherever their platoons are at on the airport. An Alamo call gets out, referencing one of the plans that they had. And Alamo plan, or also called the Crockett plan, is basically what it sounds like if you know anything about, especially Texas history, with talking about the Battle of the Alamo, Siege of the Alamo. Basically, everything that could possibly go wrong has gone wrong. Pull back to this location, hold up there for as long as you can, just last until either reinforcements come or you got nothing left. But this Alamo call is basically used to get everybody back to Ramp 8, consolidate, and try to push these people back across the airfield. And there's a bunch of different stories, takes about how that call was received, not only by the soldiers but by the Marines, because the Marines at this point are it's kind of like pulsing. It's like they go out to do this and they'll come back and they'll have like a little break for a second. For the Task Force Polar Bear guys, they're going straight from one thing to the next. They're running ragged all over the airport, doing this, that, and the other. Not that the Marines aren't keeping busy, but it's like, go here, do this, this thing happens, and then a little bit of a break, and then again and again and again and again. But from here on, for everybody, it is just continuous. Meanwhile, with the 82nd guys that are on the ground, they're way on the other side of the airfield. They have very little, if any, communication with anybody else. They're still trying to set their thing up, and for the most part, trying to figure out what's going on from them. I know later that night, they'll send out like 1 or 2 patrols to the south side of the airport. But beyond that, there's not much heard from them on the night of the 15th specifically. Which is an interview that Damien O'Connell did for the Warfighting Society podcast that he does, talking to the battalion, 1-8 Battalion XO, there's no love, as far as the Battalion XO for 1-8 is concerned, there's no love lost between the Marines and the 82nd. He feels like they should have been more involved that night especially. But they just weren't, because again, communication at that point, and I'm about to get to know the story, it's going to highlight the lack of communication quite significantly. 1140, excuse me. So while the U.S. forces are consolidating on Ramp 8, there's actually a breach in the U.S. PAX terminal on Ramp 8 itself. So that's how far north these people have actually gotten. So they've pushed all the way from the civilian terminals down here across the airfield to the PAX terminal all the way up here, and they are actually breaching, at least for a brief moment, get inside. And then any non-essential U.S. force personnel that don't need to be on the line holding these people back immediately, they're sent to a good number are sent to the Roll 2 facility, which is a Roll 2 hospital that is present on HKIA. And then a few minutes later, some NSU National Strike Unit forces that are on HKIA right now link up with the U.S. troops that are at the PAX terminal. It's just a handful of them. It's not very many. At least to my understanding, it's not very many. And it's also, at some point during this night, I don't know the time specifically, at some point that night, that evening going into the night, more aircraft from the 82nd begin to land, drop off more paratroopers. Specifically, the second flight to land had some of the field artillery battalion with them, and speaking to their battalion commander and their battalion sergeant major, confirmed this story when I talked to him. About an hour or two before they actually got to HKIA, the crew chief for the C-17 comes up and it's like, hey, the pilot wants to talk to you. It's like, all right, cool, what's he want? They go up to the cockpit, and from the battalion commander's perspective, there's the pilot and the co-pilot, and it's very clear that the co-pilot has been crying. So whatever news they're about to get is probably not good. And so the pilot begins to talk to them. He's like, "Hey, uh, I've got no communication with the tower on the ground. Uh, what I do know is that there's debris on the runway. All the lights are out, and the battalion commander that I spoke to had no idea where the pilot got this information. I have no idea where this pilot got this information. I don't know if this is something he deduced or if this is like a last transmission he might have heard garbled or something. I have no clue. But he tells the battalion commander that everyone that was on the first plane for the 82nd going into HKIA, everyone that was on that plane is dead. Again, don't know where he got that information, but that's what he's telling the battalion commander right now. So the battalion commander responds to this rather aggressively. He's like, our mission is to get to HKIA, so that's what we're going to do. And if everybody is dead, well, somebody's got to go in and get them, so guess what? We're going regardless. And the co-pilot apparently starts screaming. She's like, we're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die. Something like that. He's like, and the battalion commander is like, yeah, well, we might die, but we're going to do our job. So that's what little knowledge he has going into this situation. Clearly, none of that, as we discussed previously, none of that has actually played out. And again, where that pilot got that information, I have no clue. But that's what he's reporting to the aircraft. But they do land relatively without incident. And some of the lights are off. I'm sure there probably is some kind of debris on the runway at this point with the people going to and fro. But nobody on that was on the first aircraft has died. Nobody, period. At least U.S. forces, nobody has died. So it's not nearly as bad as it was making it out to be. But by about midnight or 1 a.m., going into August 16th, they have successfully pushed the crowd back to the civilian terminals. And again, by 1 a.m., 1:30, Task Force Polar Bear specifically has pushed the crowd back through the terminals. They are now beyond the terminals. They are technically not in HKIA anymore. And they begin to set up a blocking position on what is called Airport Circle. And so getting there, there's a small vehicle access gate allowing vehicle access to HKIA. The Task Force Polar Bear guys push through that gate and then pull out into the airport circle and try to set up as best they can on this large parking lot here as well. And something I'll say about Google Maps as of right now, again, its updates May 1st, 2025. Some of the things that you'll see on the map looking on Google Maps was not there when all this was going on. Like this big facility that's being built over here, this was just another parking lot at the time. It's really unfortunate that you can't go back and see how it was, but it is what it is. So they're going in there, setting up a blocking position. While they're doing this, more Abbey Gate's still receiving fire. And then after 3 o'clock in the morning on the 16th, while the Task Force Polar Bear is contending with holding back these civilians, things get pretty violent pretty quickly. And I have footage of this as well. And also Staff Sergeant Kirshner's account. Apparently, this little marker I have here to the right of Airport Circle, I don't know if it still is, but at the time it was kind of like a little guard shack. And according to Staff Sergeant Kirshner's account, he notes that there were 5 gunmen seen going into this building and setting up in one of the rooms there. In the video, I only hear 2 ever referenced. But this is an extremely dangerous position. because it immediately flanks the task force position, compromises everything. If there's guys in there, they got to get cleared out. So Staff Sergeant Kirshner takes a bunch of his guys and basically whoever's on hand at the time to stack up on that building, and then throwing flashbangs in as well as firing into the room. Uh, Again, according to Staff Sergeant Kirshner, he remembers eliminating at least 2 or 3 gunmen in that room, with 1 or 2 escorting out the back, escaping out the back. And in the video, the video unfortunately confirmed this, and this was a concern that Staff Sergeant Kirshner, when he was telling me that story, that something he was concerned about when he was going in to engage them was over penetration, because apparently they had been issued some of the Army's new rounds, new armor-piercing rounds that have like tungsten tips. So he's very concerned about over penetration. And watching the video, unfortunately, that does play out. Civilians that were hiding behind the guard shack, as they attempt to flee, one of them is struck and drops to the ground. Don't know if he's dead or wounded. He's very quickly dragged off by a couple of other civilians, and this is from the video that I've seen. But yeah, so that plays out. Almost immediately after that happens, some more gunmen, probable Taliban, appear on this road just south of Airport Circle. One of the task force polar bear snipers engages and eliminates one of them. Another is wounded. And then while this is happening, again, wishing this wasn't there because it would make more sense if it wasn't, but I'll do the best I can to describe it. There's apparently some kind of access gate or way that the Taliban can access the airport in this area. So the whole time Task Force Polar Bear is setting up here, Taliban and other gunmen, whoever, is sneaking around here and getting in behind them and actually getting back into the terminal that they just passed through. So they start taking fire basically from their rear. So they're shooting back at the terminal, shooting back at this little area, this grassy area here, engaging another couple of gunmen, eliminating them, wounding them. And the sketchy thing about that, all that is that while they're setting up that blocking position there at Airport Circle, the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, they're setting up a kind of blocking position from the terminal all the way over to Abbey Gate and trying to hold this section here. So as the Taliban are coming in, getting behind the polar bears, very risky possible blue on blue situations there, because yeah, it's a rough situation. But eventually things kind of calm down enough, not really, but as far as the shooting is concerned, things kind of calm down. Just before 5 o'clock, another 10th Mountain unit that has been on the ground, Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 30th Infantry, out of Fort Polk, Louisiana. They'd been spun up and sent to Afghanistan as well. They're sent to plus up the security at the embassy. Just before 5 o'clock, they return from the embassy and arrive on HKIA, and they make preparations to go south and link up with the polar bears. They will not make it in time. I'll get to that in a second. By 5:15, it is estimated that there are around 2,000 people, probably more, in the vicinity of Airport Circle. And again, kind of watching the video, I actually posted part of it on Instagram. Watching the video, it is just an incredible amount of people, like right up in their faces. They're using their MRAPs, their vehicles, as makeshift barricades to try to keep the people back. They're using the vehicle barricades organic to the airport to try to keep people back. And eventually they'll try to start kind of guiding the crowd to the west and away from the airport itself. Unfortunately, while they're trying to do this, and again, talking about Task Force Polar Bear, this is a company minus. Basically what that means is an understrength company by this point. So you're talking about maybe 90 soldiers altogether in them in that unit compared to 2,000 plus people that are trying to get into the airport. So as they're trying to guide these people away, they're stretching out their own line. And at the same time, there's people coming up to them with U.S. passports saying like, "Hey, we're American citizens, we're British citizens, we're this, we're that. Can you help us? Can you get us in?" And it's kind of like, what do we do? We don't really have any guidance on this, but these are U.S. citizens. We got to help them, right? So that's distracting them. A lot of people, and their line gets spread really thin. And eventually, people start to exploit the gaps in their line. And by about 6 o'clock, their line is basically begins to collapse. And at 6:20, a call goes out, which is a call that no one ever wants to hear in the military. 6:20, Task Force Polar Bear position is overrun. So the position at the airport circle is completely deteriorated. They have to fall back to the airport, past the civilian terminals, going back through that little tiny, tight vehicle access gate, and hopefully link up with the Marines, which are initially overwhelmed by the wave as well. But by 7 o'clock or 7:10, they've established a new blocking position, and they kind of hold there for a while. And this is something that has been reported on. What Corporal Matthew Langston, a designated marksman with Alpha Company 1st Battalion 8th Marines, he simply refers to it as the event. Some guys will refer to it as a firefight, but if it was a firefight, it was a very one-sided one. So things are kind of calmed down by this point. They are holding enough to keep the crowd back. But this vehicle comes through the vehicle access gate. Several armed men get out. Assumed Taliban. It's unclear if they are, though. And depending on who you talk to, the reports vary. Some say they weren't firing, but they were posturing aggressively towards the U.S. forces. Some say they were firing, they were shooting at the crowd. Some say they were shooting at the U.S. forces. It's all jumbled up, and I'm not sure I'm not sure what's right and what's wrong there, but these armed men get out, and they are at the very least posturing aggressively towards Americans, raising their weapons, pointing their weapons at them. And then the first shot rings out, and this is more than likely from one of the Task Force Polar Bear soldiers. Because most of the Marines on their rifles, they have suppressors on their rifles, and most of the soldiers do not. Well, I don't think any of the soldiers do. So it's very distinct when a soldier takes a shot versus when a Marine takes a shot. But a soldier takes a shot, and one of the Taliban immediately drops. Headshot, perfect, nice and clean, drops immediately. Not long after that, again, the reports vary about if a second gunman started shooting at him or the gunman tried to drag his buddy away. The entire line of Marines and soldiers just opens up and just light guy drops almost immediately. And then that is an incident that you will hear about. It was kind of semi-reported on. Basically, two hostile enemies, both KIA. One of the cool things about it, though, and that was noted by the Marines on the ground as well in hindsight, was the fire discipline executed by the Marines. Is that when there was a target, they engaged. The second there wasn't a target anymore, or at least a threat, they stopped their engagement. So they fired enough to eliminate the threat and didn't fire anymore after that. So that's incredible fire discipline on their part. I just wanted to highlight that. And then talking about Matthew Langston specifically as a designated marksman, he says that there were two other guys that kind of attempted to flee. They went and hid behind, as he described it, some kind of shed. And him and another designated marksman, his buddy, right next to him, they tracked him. And one of the guys that had hid behind that shed started poking his head out again, suspiciously. And then Langston had his scope trained right on his head. And then he saw the gas block of the AK-47, which is kind of like a very, not to get too into gun stuff, but the AK-47 is a very distinct angled gas block, and as soon as he saw that gas block come into his scope, fired. Uh, One round struck the Taliban right in the head. The other one, fired by his buddy, struck him in the chest, dropped him immediately. So 3 KIA total, but you'll never hear much about the third one. And then where the last guy or whoever was left, they just disappeared into the crowd or got out of the airport or something. And there's descriptions of other engagements as well. I'm not sure if they're all referencing the same engagement, because it's like there's some similarities, but at the same time, there's enough differences. It makes me think there might be more than one that happened. I'm not sure though. I really don't know. But yeah. Anyway, it's also around this time that another unit which I hadn't mentioned yet, because again, I've only interviewed 2 guys from 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, so I don't know much about them or their movements. But they had been informed that they were going to get sent to Kabul as well. I'm pretty sure on the 12th, or actually no, probably maybe on the 13th. Again, I'm not sure because I haven't interviewed enough guys to really nail it down. But between 7 and 8 o'clock that morning, while things are still kind of quiet, a C-17 touches down, unloading Headquarters Company 2-1, along with Echo Company 4th Platoon 2-1. And they immediately after disembarking, they push south to give some relief to the 1-8 Marines and the 10th Mountain guys that are down there. And talking about the 82nd as well, going into the morning of the 16th, this is now when they're becoming more and more involved. So parts of Alpha Company 2504 have pushed south. They're kind of holding down the far right flank of the blocking position along the civilian international terminal. Have some video of that as well. It's pretty intense stuff because the Afghans are just trying to find any way that they can get past this blockade to get to the aircraft and try to hopefully get on and just get out of the country. That's their one goal. The Taliban's behind them. The Marines and the soldiers are in front of them. They just see them as an obstacle. If we can just get past them and get on a plane, we can get out of here. That's all they're thinking about. And then around 8:30 or a little after 8:30, Task Force Polar Bear 1st Platoon reports bullets impacting one of their vehicles, but they can't identify a shooter. More small arms fire reported leading up to 9 o'clock. Around 9:30, Abbey Gate has been breached. And at some point, around like 10 o'clock, maybe as late as 11 o'clock, the blocking position held by the Marines and the soldiers down the south side of the airport is basically disintegrated and they're overrun. And they have to try to fall back to reconsolidate. And this is when all those videos and pictures that you see of people running across the tarmac, sitting down those grassy fields, getting in the ditches, going this way, going that way. People crawling on the aircraft, falling off of the ladders they used to get up to the aircraft. This is when all of that is happening, and there's too many stories, honestly, of just things the Marines and the soldiers are seeing, what they're hearing, what they're experiencing. It's a lot. But eventually, they get pushed all the way back to ramp 8 once again. They establish a new blocking position. By 11 o'clock, Task Force Polar Bears employing tear gas, CS gas. And unlike the warning shots, which up to this point haven't been very effective, CS gas is effective. So they start using more and more of that. Unfortunately for the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, a lot of them don't have their gas masks. Which, when I heard that, was an eye-opener because I always hated carrying my gas mask around, but it was one thing I was always told. It's like, hey, you need to have this on your gear at all times wherever we go. I'm like, sure, I guess I'll have it. But some of them remember being told specifically, like, hey, don't worry about it. You're not going to need it, which blows my mind. And then some of them just didn't have it on their person when they went out there to deal with the crowds initially. So using tear gas, not having a gas mask, you better hope the wind's blowing the other way. And it wasn't always blowing the other way. So they're gassing themselves as much as they're gassing the crowd. But thankfully, the crowd is less willing to fight through the gas than they are. And then 1227, kind of talking about all this stuff going on in the South. Something that doesn't get reported on is something that I personally still don't know a whole lot about. I've only just recently talked to a guy from a medic from Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion 504. And while Alpha Company's down south helping out the polar bears and the Marines, Bravo Company is up north on Ramp 9, and there's been a breach there as well through one of the gates on Ramp 9, and they're trying their best to try to hold these people back. There's not that many of them there either. And some of the people break through and they start making their way over to like North Gate and just wandering around Ramp 8. Eventually they get corralled, but it's not just people pushing in from the south. It's people coming down from the north as well. The whole time that all that's going on as well, talking to one of the snipers for 2504, they set up in one of the towers on Camp Alvarado, and they're looking out to the north and the west, and they're seeing more and more people just coming out of the woodwork, coming towards HKIA, and it's just like, what are we supposed to do with this? So there's a lot going on at one time, and I can't really do it justice. I wish I could, but hopefully in writing I can do it justice, but yeah.
I'm sure you
And
can.
hopefully. But sometime around noon, the infamous video pictures of Afghans of a C-17 attempting to take off. Mostly young Afghan men hopping onto the wheel wells and the landing gear of the C-17. They've broken through the Marine lines. How exactly this played out is unclear. According to the battalion commander from 319th, he says it shouldn't have happened. It didn't need to happen. That plane didn't need to take off. But then watching the documentary Escape from Kabul, which features a lot of 1st Battalion 8th Marines leadership, specifically Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Richard Della, says that he got the attention of the pilots on that aircraft and told them, like, hey, you're drawing all the attention towards you. You're drawing all the civilians towards you. You need to get out of here as soon as possible. You need to leave. Who was right? Who was wrong? In the moment, it's hard to say who. But C-17 begins preparations to take off. They try to take off once. Too many civilians on the runway. They get back on the taxiway. They turn around and try it again. And this is when the Apaches come in and try to clear the runway using their rotor wash, flying super, super low to the ground. Like their landing gear is almost touching the ground. It wouldn't be unheard of if the Afghans just tried to jump up and grab onto the wheels of the Apaches. But thankfully they didn't. But flying that low to the ground, using their rotor wash in that kind of way, excellent pilots for those Apaches. They get the runway clear enough that the C-17 can gain speed and take off. And again, mostly young Afghan men climbed on there. Some of the Marines go back and they try to physically grab them and pull them off. They don't get all of them. And what happens in the videos and pictures and everything happens. And talking to everybody who was there on the 16th, who was on the airfield out there with the crowds and everything, it was like everything just stopped. Every single one was like, they say everything just stopped and all eyes turned to that aircraft and watched what happened. And talking to one guy recently, he was like, the crowds, the Afghans started to cheer that these guys were going to get out. Those cheers quickly turn into screams when they see them start to fall. And the Marines, it's a very mixed bag as well, because they've been up all night, going at it all day the previous day with basically no food. None of them have eaten, really. And very, very, very little water. Some of them start laughing. Some of them are horrified. by the site as well. Some of them are just dumbstruck and they don't know what to feel about it. They just don't know, like, what is the situation that we're in? Like, what is happening here? It's just, yeah, it was a lot for them to see and then try to process after the fact. And then again, talking to that medic from Bravo Company, not him specifically, but some of the guys from his company, uh, when things eventually calmed down, or at least they got the people off the tarmac, some of his guys were sent out there to clean up the bodies or what was left of the bodies to clear the runway.
Yeah, I
He
heard that
didn't
was
talk to,
really gory, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, imagine falling several hundred or several thousand feet, what that does to a body. It's, yeah. He didn't talk about it too much because, one, he wasn't there to see it specifically, just what guys came back and told him about it because he was a pretty good medic, not just being there for his guy's physical well being, but try to be there for him mentally as well. And he really tried his best as he could in that situation, which, yeah, good dude. And 1:30, a bolo gets sent out for a possible V bid. Vehicle borne IED, car bomb basically. Looking out for a gold Corolla, which in Afghanistan in the Middle East doesn't really help because there's a lot of gold Corollas around there. Just saying, there's a lot of white sedans. So good luck identifying that. Thankfully, there is no V bid appears. There's no detonation, anything like that. Thank God. And also around 1:30, the Roll 2 hospital receives one Marine casualty. They assess him as stable. I believe the shots were fired somewhere around Ramp 5, which is the south side of the airport. I've heard mixed reports about this as well. Uh, Pretty confident saying this was not enemy fire. Uh, this was, from again, just from what I'm hearing, and I could be wrong about this, but just based on what I'm hearing and from what the guys are telling me, it was probably a ND or a negligent discharge. Marine was wounded in the thigh. I actually have video of him as well, being loaded into a vehicle, being sent off to the Roll 2. And just from what I saw in the video, he wasn't bleeding very much, thankfully. He was clearly shot in the leg. His pants were cut away. At least the pants leg where he was wounded was cut away. Not a whole lot of damage that I could see. Bleeding, some bleeding, but not excessive. Uh, Smile on his face, though. Seemed in pretty good spirits, so nothing too bad. And a quick funny story that about that particular incident was that happened next to First Sergeant Kelly's vehicle. And from his perspective, he just looks over and he sees a Marine getting pushed by the crowd and falling over. And then his medic he remembers his medic asking him, was like, hey, can I go check on that guy? And he's like, no, just stay here. He'll be fine. We'll get up. And then he hears over the radio later that exact call of a Marine being admitted into the Roll 2. He's like, hey, Doc, why didn't you tell me that guy was shot? He's like, I thought you knew. It's like, no, I didn't know. I thought he just fell over. But yeah, quick funny story there. And then just after 2 o'clock, this is the first report of the Taliban being helpful in this whole situation. Over at Abbey Gate, the Taliban have basically set up shop there temporarily, and they're beginning to fire warning shots to attempt to disperse the crowd. The Taliban's version of warning shots are not the same as the U.S. military's. They will shoot directly over people's heads and into people. So, yeah. And then at 2:40, that's when the call from National Strike Unit 01, 0 units, they call out to HKIA that they are leaving Eagle Base. Estimated time of arrival is 90 minutes, depending on security concerns as well as traffic. And they're bringing about 210 vehicles fully loaded with their guys with them. And then shortly after 4 o'clock or 16:08, 100 hours, they arrive on HKIA through Camp Alvarado. They actually have to breach the wall to allow themselves in because everywhere else is just clogged up. And then at some point after that, this is kind of where the talk log that I was given ends. At some point after that, they link up with U.S. forces, uh, give them a lot of relief, and then eventually they just go to work. And ha- I haven't heard much detail about it. A lot of the Marines that I've spoken to didn't actually see it happen, and then what the few that do reference it don't reference it in detail. Just give like very vague descriptions of what was going on. Basically, everything that you've probably heard already. Uh, they get out there and they start trying to force these people off. If you don't get out of the way, you're getting run over. You put up any kind of resistance, you get beat. You put up more resistance, you get shot. So they're not afraid to be as aggressive as they deem they need to be to get these people off the airfield. And even throughout the day on the 16th, some of the interactions the Marines are having and the soldiers are having with the crowds, not everyone in the crowd is hysterical. Some of them are very coherent. Some of them know what's going on, and they feel they feel bad for the Marines and the soldiers. Like they go up to them and it's like, I'm sorry, all these people are so stupid. Because they understand how an airport works. They understand how planes work, that they need an airstrip to take off and land on. And so some of them try to help by translating and telling the people like, hey, we know things are bad right now, but we need to get off of here so that they can do what they need to do to help us. But mob mentality is long since set in. And then there's some people that come up to. I heard one story from a Marine who's an Afghan who speaks spoke pretty good English. Came up to him and is like, if you want people to start listening to, start shooting people. That's the only way they're going to listen. But U.S. forces, we don't do that. We're not trained to do that. And even if I'm confident in saying that obviously in history, you'll find evidence to the contrary in some very, very rare instances. But even if you receive orders to shoot into civilian population, I don't see U.S. service members following that order. So I did hear of some incidents where Marines had to get and soldiers had to get extremely aggressive with some of the civilians to not just to get them back, but just to protect themselves. Marines getting lost in the crowd, like next one moment they're next to their buddies online, holding these people back. Next thing you know, they're completely surrounded by Afghans and have to like literally fight their way out of the crowd to get back to their guys. I heard of one instance as well that a paratrooper in a vehicle. They're passing, they're driving around the tarmac, trying to get through the crowd, or trying to link up with the rest of their guys, and they get surrounded by the crowd. And then the crowd basically swarms the vehicle. They're trying to climb on the vehicle. They're trying to get in the vehicle. This, that, and the other. Paratrooper in question, in attempt to defend his own life as well as that of the vehicle, just starts spraying with his weapon, and I mean it was effective. Crowd clears up enough for him to get the vehicle through and get back to link up the rest of his unit. But haven't heard too many. That's really the only story I've heard like that. But yeah, and kind of going the rest of the afternoon, the Marines and soldiers for the most part get a lot of relief. The NSU-01 takes over, pushing people out. And then just before sunset, more 82nd begins to arrive. This time, 1st Battalion 504 Red Devils. They begin to land. I want to talk to a couple of people from that battalion specifically. One of them being Sergeant Melissa Hernandez, team leader with 1504. Not long after they get on the ground, they're sent to the southwest side of HKIA to kind of shore up the defenses there. And more or less, that southwest corner going into the civilian terminals, that'll be 1504's kind of area of operations for the coming days and coming weeks. But yeah. And then also around midnight, Bravo Company, the rest of Bravo Company 1-8 and Weapons Company 1-8 begins to touch down. That's including some of my junior Marines, Corporals Whalen and Landon specifically. when I was in, and they were with LAR, and there were a couple of my guys at that time before they got orders to 1-8. That's when they land, and then also around that time as well, talking about the aircraft that had taken off around noon with the bodies falling off. And talking about more LAR guys, they've made their movement to they're waiting in Al Udeid in Qatar to get on a plane, going through all kinds of frustrations there. But while they're there, they see a bunch of emergency vehicles going to the C-17 further down one of the aprons, and based on what they're seeing, they very quickly figure out that that was the aircraft that they had seen on social media and on the news, and they describe some of the remains that are being literally flushed out or washed out of the wheel wells of that C-17 of the Afghans who had tried to climb up in there for thinking that they would be able to ride in there all the way back, which if they didn't freeze to death, they got crushed to death. And what was left of them was sprayed out with fire hoses.
Oh, that's horrifying.
So that was their introduction to what they were about to go into. Plus, just seeing all the videos and everything of the Marines fighting with the crowds and all of that. So they're not expecting to go into a good situation. But their story comes later on the 17th when they actually do show up. And then at some point between 11 o'clock and midnight that night, 3rd Platoon, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, they get attached. They get sent out. They get a tasking that to the south side of the airport to the civilian domestic terminal, and that they're told that the National Strike Unit is going to conduct a raid on civilian terminal because the Taliban have moved in there and they've set up shop. And this is from Lieutenant Ethan Moody, who's the platoon commander for 3rd Platoon. They go down there and they're told to set up in an outer cordon. And basically, when you do a raid, you have the actual raid force that's going to go in and assault the objective. You have an inner cordon, make sure that nobody's going to leave that objective, get out. And then you have an outer cordon, make sure nobody's going to get in. So the NSU takes care of the assault force plus the inner cordon, and then the Marines are setting up an outer cordon. And he describes it that the Taliban commander and the NSU commander actually meet face to face before this happens. And the NSU commander tells him, like, you need to leave or we're going to come in there, we're going to kill you. To use Lieutenant Moody's words, the Taliban commander basically says, bet. And then the NSU commander tells him, like, all right, 11:30, we're going to come in there, we're going to kill all of you. And then it's not long after that the raid takes place. And from Lieutenant Moody's knowledge, about 30 or so the Taliban are killed in that raid, and the terminal is cleared. And that's kind of the last action that happens on the 16th. And then finally, 3 o'clock on 17 August, Alpha Company 1-8 is finally allowed to go back and actually rest. And that's kind of the end of what I've come to call the Battle of HKIA.
That's so intense. I knew so very little of that. And I mean, all of the ticks, all of the, I had no clue. I feel like I've missed a whole lot. And that was really incredible. I appreciate you taking all of that time to put that. That must have taken forever to put together. And I hope that it helps when you come to laying it out too for like the future so that it's, I mean that's really detailed and fantastic. I've taken so many notes and I'm going to use them in the future whenever I have to talk about this or think about it. It's just so much yeah, well done.
Appreciate it. Sorry for just rambling on for however long I've been going. Yeah. It's
No,
a lot to go through, and there's a lot going on. I probably could have summarized some of it a bit better, but it's a lot.
what I love is that there's, the overall and then the looks at what everybody's doing. I mean, you did it. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, and you want to hear the people's perspectives too. So you brought those in. I mean, it was really a lot of great information, and it definitely gave me that picture that I've been missing of those first days. We'll have to do it next year after your book comes out for some more days down the line as you get some more, I'm sure you're going to hear from more people in the next however many months before you have to turn in a finished draft.
Yeah. It's just the only thing hard about doing the rest of the days, apart from like very clear days like 26th August, August 26th, Abbey Gate. That's pretty well documented and nailed down. The rest of the
Mm-hmm.
days, it's just for, especially the guys running gate operations or just doing anything, really anything on HKI, it's just one day after the next, they just run into each other. They can't remember, like,
Yeah.
a lot of times they just can't remember like what happened on what specific day. So it's harder to actually nail down a timeline for most of those other days. It's just, but yeah, that's why I'm
That's
telling the story
interesting.
about the 15th and the 16th because that's pretty well documented. The guys who were there remember it pretty well, and they're pretty clear that it happened on those days. I do have some guys to say like, "Oh yeah, we were out there fighting with the crowds for like 3 days," and I'm like, "I'm pretty sure you're running some days together there, bud." but
Oh yeah. But
I'm sure it felt like that.
exactly. That's what I was going to say is, I mean, that period had to feel like a month for some people too. I mean, the whole thing, even though it was just like 2 weeks, right? And that just, the lack of food, the conditions, God, Mike Markland's video will forever live inside my head because it's, a visual of just, the bathrooms that, oh my God, like what is going on here? This is not normal. Watching him beat the hell out of things with a Halligan tool, like, bro, that's just, yeah. This is only the beginning, and it's so much, but it's only the beginning, and it only gets, in some ways, it gets less chaotic, right? Because you've pushed the people off and you've created the space, but in some ways, it gets more and more and more. The babies and the things that we've talked about before that just.
I mean, inside the airport itself, for the most part, things calm down and the chaos is contained. And the chaos is contained to those entry points: North Gate, South Gate, East Gate, Abbey Gate,
Right.
uh, Black Gate, Glory Gate, Liberty Gate, whatever you want to call it, ECP1. That's pretty well under control because only very specific people are coming through there. But like the main entry points, again, North, South, East, Abbey Gate, those, the chaos there reigns supreme.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you brought up that map. I had never seen a map like that before. So that has expanded my vocabulary and understanding in a big way. And I really appreciate that. Now when somebody tells me I was here, I can actually, think about it. I love that. We have a wrap up to do. Any final words from you, Chris, about what this anniversary means, what you've gleaned overall from this before we close out?
It's just as more time passes, the more important it becomes to really nail things down because things will get more and more muddled as time goes on. Things will get solidified as well as time goes on. It's kind of like a paradox, but one thing I'll say to everyone who's deployed in August of 2021, I'll say you didn't go through it then. You didn't go through it alone then. Don't go through it alone now, because even when I was with OAR, I know August specifically is a rough month for everyone who was deployed at that time. Everyone who was there at HKI, and even those who weren't, like the rest of the Polar Bears 431, the rest of the battalion. While Charlie Company and the part of Delta and the snipers are over in HKI doing their thing, dealing with all their thing that we just went through, they're sitting back in Kuwait. They're told they might be going back, but they never end up doing. And it's just have to like sit there and watch what their sister company and what the rest of their guys are going through, and that messed with them as well. And same thing with the guys from the 24th MEU. Not everybody from the MEU went in. I'm sure not everybody from the SP MAGTF went in either. But just because they weren't there physically doesn't mean it was any less rough on them having to sit on the sidelines basically and watch their boys go, their brothers and their sisters go through what they did.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception among civilians, particularly. And I mean, I am a civilian, but I had a really close friend, Marine veteran, who, that was his biggest struggle, was that he never got to go see the elephant. And when you're in this particular situation, it is such a harrowing time, and you're seeing snippets of things, and you know that they need the help and you can't be there to give it. There's so many layers of difficult in that. So I there are so many stories that deserve to be told. But I understand the difficulty of it too. And we were talking about this before we started recording, that it can be too raw for some people, and in some cases it's more important to prioritize your mental health. But I feel like when you reach that point where you can, it is really important too, because it just rounds out the story. If you had missed a couple of those accounts in here, it wouldn't be you wouldn't be able to verify things and talk about them. And really, that remains a huge thing. The verifying what happened on the 26th, the complex attack, all of those things. If you don't talk to enough people, you can't be sure of what really happened. And this is a really tough month for people. It's hard for me, and I wasn't even there. So I've heard from many HKIA veterans about how difficult August is. So if you need help right now, please find it. OAR is a great resource. There are, if you're a service member, there are resources to you inside the military, but there are groups like PB Abate that want to be there if you're a veteran to help you process. There are storytelling groups. There are just so many different places to go. And I'll try to get a roundup of them for the show notes, just in case anybody needs some extra help right now, because it's always there. And the dark times do end. Chris, thank you so much for doing this. It means a lot to me. And yeah, I learned a lot.
Glad I could help clear some things up, and just thank you for letting me come on here and talk about it. I love getting the opportunity to talk about it. I got no problem listening to the stories. I mean, that's what I do. And if I didn't enjoy it, I don't know if that's the right word, but if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't keep doing it. But yeah, just make sure let me get the name of the project out there, and just some of the stuff that I've been able to do, especially like talking about these couple of days in Kabul, piecing things together and trying to tell a story, and trying to tell an accurate story that reflects the reality on the ground, and just shows like what they went through trying to make the best out of a horrible situation, which in the end they did. In the end, they did make the best out of it as best as they could. Could it have been better? Sure. Could it have been worse? Absolutely. And thankfully, it wasn't worse.
Absolutely. And I think this really shows that too. So I appreciate everything you're doing with that. And I want to thank everybody who listened for your time, Tasha Core, and hope to see all of you again soon.